Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you so much for coming to this month's Ask the Arborist. And this time we're talking about tree care for homeowners. And thank you so much for Veritiv for participating with us. And I'm just going to roll right into the intro so we finish on time. If you don't know us, we're Trees Atlanta. And our mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forests by planting, conserving, and educating. And that's us. We're part of the education team presenting this to you. And at the end of this session, we'd like to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions to our wonderful presenter. And if you look on your Zoom, there should be a Q&A box either at the bottom of your screen or the top, wherever your little control panel is, and you can just ask questions anytime throughout the presentation, whenever it comes to you, and at the end we will address them. And at the end of this event, you'll get an automatic survey from us from an email, and we'd love if you would just do a favor and fill out the survey, and it will just help us better prepare presentations and educational events based off of what most people want to learn and how they want to learn. So please take a minute and do that once you receive that email. And this is just our social media links, and we also have a newsletter that's more geared towards volunteer events and education events. So please feel free to sign up for that. And now I'd love to hand it off to Susan. She's our wonderful Associate Director of Volunteer Services and also a certified arborist. And she's got a presentation prepared for us too. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Susan, and hand it off to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the intro, Lynn. Thank you to all of the Veritiv employees who are here with us today. I'm so happy to be sharing more information with you about basic tree care. So let me start my screen sharing. All right, Lynn, can you see it?
Yep, you're all good.
Thanks. So as Lynn said, I am the Associate Director of Volunteer Services at Trees Atlanta, which means that I work with our coordinators and with groups of volunteers and individuals to match them up with ways that they can help serve through our mission. And I have been with the organization for almost 17 years now. I was the Neighborhoods Program Manager for 10 years. And as Lynn said, I am an ISA certified arborist. My background is in forest resources, and I really enjoy talking about trees. And I love to answer any questions that people have about how to care for trees in their own yard or how to get more involved with us. So we do welcome questions at the end. The presentation I have for you is about 30 minutes long, and I'm going to be covering all of the basics of things that you can do to help your trees. But we have a lot more resources beyond what I'm going to be talking about today on our website. So please visit treesatlanta.org. At the top of the menu, there is a section called Resources. And there you'll find a wide range of topics, and they all relate back to our mission. There's even more info about our Neighborhood Arboreta program, where you can visit different neighborhoods around the city where we've labeled the trees. So you can learn more about tree identification by visiting those Neighborhood Arboreta. Today, we're going to talk about ways to care for all trees and like the basic needs of trees. I'll talk a little bit about pruning and what trees need. We'll talk about how to remove vines from trees, give you some tips on doing that, and some alternative plants that you can replace your ground covers with. We'll also talk about when it's important to hire a certified arborist to do tree work, and then we'll take questions. So you may already know this, but I just wanted to cover the reasons why we want to care for trees. Trees do a lot for us, and especially here in Atlanta, where we live in a temperate forest, we can grow trees, and we have a lot. there's a lot that they're providing for us. So they're lowering our air temperatures and reducing our energy costs. They help increase property value because mature trees take a long time to get to be mature, and time is money. And people who are investing in property understand that they can't replace that mature tree easily. They're going to have to wait another 50 years to have that. Of course, you're probably familiar with the fact that trees help clean our air and water by removing particulate matter, by sequestering carbon and replacing our oxygen. The trees also provide privacy and sound dampening in urban areas like Atlanta. And a shady space with a lot of trees helps welcome people outdoors, makes them feel a little more comfortable in the hot weather that we have during the summer, which helps build community and helps people linger and get to know their neighbors. So there's two main things that we need to consider when we're caring for trees, and it's what's below ground and what's above ground. So below ground, we have our roots, which are the support system for the tree. They're feeding the tree, they're stabilizing it, and there's a lot we can do to help those roots. Above ground, we have the stem and the canopy of the tree, and they are producing food as well and helping the tree grow larger to get more of the resources it needs from above ground. So let's talk about below the soil first. Healthy roots need adequate soil volume, first of all, to be able to get all of the resources they need, like water, nutrients, oxygen. They also need to have minimal compaction, which means how the soil can be like compacted together and tighter. When there's less pore space in the soil, there's less room for the things that the trees need, like water and oxygen. Some trees need specific soil textures, like some trees grow really well in sandy soils. Some trees grow really well in more well-drained, higher clay soils. So it just depends on the species and what it needs and the area where it likes to grow. All trees need good soil nutrition. They need the elements that help them grow. And they need consistent soil moisture that will help provide the tree with its transpiration needs, which means moving water up through the tree and out through the leaves. And then all of our trees need biotic relationships with things like fungus, like mycorrhizal fungus, and also other organisms like worms and insects. And really the answer to all of those needs is mulch. It's the best thing that you can provide for your trees to help them thrive. We're going to talk more about why mulch. But first, I wanted to mention that the best thing you can give a tree is what comes from that tree. So leaving leaf litter on the ground is the one, or like the single best thing that you can do for your tree. It's not always possible to leave the leaves. I know in my own yard, the leaves blow away into my neighbor's yard. So I try to move the leaves that I know are going to blow away to another area of my yard where they can still provide a lot of benefits. And then I replace those leaves with an organic mulch that's very similar to the trees I have in my yard. So this is my yard. I have this red maple in the center. I've got a crepe myrtle off to the side. These are hardwood trees, so I try to lay down fresh hardwood mulch every year to help replace some of the leaves that are blown away down the hill into my neighbor's yard. And I try to retain as many leaves as possible. So why mulch? Mulch helps hold moisture in the soil longer. And as you know, just like people, trees need water to live. So keeping that water readily available is key for keeping the tree healthy. It also helps suppress other plants like weeds and other things that want to grow around young trees, which reduces competition for all the things that the trees need. The mulch also absorbs physical energy and reduces compaction. So if you have a lot of people walking around the area where your trees are, walking on top of the roots, or if you have like lawnmowers or cars even driving over the roots, the mulch will help absorb the energy from those things that are on top of the root system and protect the roots from from damage from those things, and then also protect the soil from compacting down to where no moisture or air could be in it. Mulch can also reduce erosion, so it can prevent the soil from washing away by, again, absorbing energy, typically from rain. The raindrops hit the mulch, their energy is dispersed, and that rain isn't washing the soil away as quickly. As the mulch, organic mulch, breaks down, it's adding nutrients back to the soil, and it's also providing a better habitat for the microorganisms that the tree relies on for a healthy environment. Sometimes it relies on those microorganisms for nutrients as well. So there's a lot. We really highly recommend keeping mulch around your trees. This picture of a root here is also from my yard. This is another red maple root, and it was in this kind of grassy area and getting mowed over for many years before we moved in. The root was not only getting damaged here, but the soil around it is getting compacted as we walked on it and as we use the lawnmower in that area. So we put mulch now on top of the roots to help protect them so they're not getting cut up as much. And I try to leave the leaves, of course, as much as possible. I just want to keep reiterating that because the leaves are so important, not only for the trees, but also for the wildlife that lives in our area. A few other ways to help your tree roots is to get a soil test done if you think that your tree might be lacking in something it needs. Our UGA Extension Service can provide different types of soil tests. The most common is a nutrient soil test and a pH soil test. If you fear that your soil may be super compacted and creating problems for your trees, you can hire an arborist to actually measure the compaction of the soil and address that if needed. They can help reduce the compaction by loosening it up. They use cool tools. One common one is an air spade, where they're actually injecting air into the soil to help break it up and loosen it. But the key time that you might need to hire an arborist, especially to look into how your roots are doing, is when you are changing something on your property. So say you're going through construction, like adding an addition to your house, you're adding a pool, or perhaps grading your yard or terracing it. All of those things can really affect tree roots. And so an arborist can help evaluate what the impact will be for your trees and help prescribe different methods so that you can alleviate the damage that might be done. We often see that it takes 2 to 3 years for that damage to become apparent. So you may have done construction and then 2 to 3 years later, your trees begin to show signs of stress or they're starting to die. So it's not always immediate, and it's good to think ahead and help your trees so that they can withstand whatever it is that you want to complete. One last thing you can do to help improve the soil is to keep things off of it. So using a border, planting, or a fence, something just to protect that critical root zone of your tree and prevent the soil from getting compacted. And then water is super important for our tree roots. Our young trees at Trees Atlanta get watered on a very regular schedule every 7 to 10 days. But as the trees get established and as the roots start to grow outwards, they don't need quite as much water, and we start to reduce the number of visits. But anytime we go through a long period without much rainfall, we have to check up on all of our trees. And the same is true for mature trees in your yard. If we're in a drought time, perhaps it hasn't rained for 3 weeks, or we've got very little rain for a whole month, that's a good time to go ahead and give your mature trees some supplemental water. And the way that an arborist friend at Trees Atlanta recommends doing it is to set up a sprinkler under the drip line area of your tree, which means like all the way out to the edges of the canopy. That is how far you want to water with a sprinkler. And you can use a rain gauge to measure, or you can even just set up like a tin can, like a tuna can, and watch when it fills up all the way. Because what we're going for is about 1 inch of water. So 1 inch of rainfall is what we're trying to mimic. And when we're going through periods of drought, that's recommended like every 1 to 2 weeks. just depending on how much rainfall we're getting. All right, so we're going to switch gears, talk a little bit about pruning. One of my favorite things that I get to do at Trees Atlanta is to teach pruning classes. We teach our volunteers how to prune young trees while they're still small enough that we can reach them. And it's the most impactful time to prune our trees because we're helping shape the structure of the tree for its future. And what we're hoping to promote is a very strong, healthy structure that will allow the tree to live its longest, most full life. We plant a lot of trees along streets and in parks. This photo here is a picture along the Atlanta Beltline where we planted some fringe trees. So the trees that we're planting are up against a lot. They have a lot of interactions with people and vehicles. A tree in your yard may not have quite as much interaction and therefore need less structural or less clearance pruning, but the same basic methods apply to how you would prune a tree in your yard as well. So why do we prune? Well, when trees naturally exist in a forest community, they have other trees around them, and they're all competing for sunlight, which means they're all focused on growing upwards towards the light, or if they're an edge species, they're just focused on staying out at the edge of the forest to get light. So since the trees are focused on growing upwards, they don't spread out as much, and they really maximize their height. When we're planting large trees in parks or in yards, we really want the same thing to happen. We want the trees to maximize their potential for size so that they can provide the most benefits possible, the most shade and the most cleaning of the air. But if they're given unlimited sunlight, they don't have as much need to just grow upwards and tall. They have all of that sunlight that they need right there, so they're just going to spread out and get it. So we have to help encourage these overstory trees to grow large and continue their path upwards to get tall because we really want to maximize them. So often with our overstory trees, we're pruning to keep them growing upwards instead of stunting themselves and staying small. We also prune small trees, and we have to prune them for clearance often so that they don't get into the street or the sidewalk. The same thing could be true if you have something in your yard that you want to prune for, like if you have a bench area or a walking path and you need to prune for clearance. We'll often remove branches for that reason. We always prune anything that's damaged off because we want to try to prevent the spread of decay in the tree. And then sometimes later in life, we're pruning for risk management. It's not something that Trees Atlanta volunteers do because this typically happens as the tree gets older. Risk management means that we might be doing removals to help prevent any breakage in the future, or if there's like a hazardous branch that looks like it has damage and it needs to be removed. This is typically done by an arborist. We also prune for aesthetics sometimes, though my personal strong belief is that aesthetics follow structure. So good structure leads to great aesthetics in a tree. So pruning for structure is our main goal. We do it when the trees are young. We're trying to make the smallest wounds possible on a tree. So if you can make a correction when the tree is younger, it's going to create fewer problems for the tree because the tree will be able to close up that wound more quickly. If you wait till the tree's older and the branch is larger, you create a larger wound on the tree when you go to remove it. We recommend pruning your trees yourself as long as you can reach it from a step ladder or using a pole pruner, which is a pruner on a pole, either from the ground or from a low ladder. We don't recommend climbing trees yourself or trying to prune from something unsafe like the top of a vehicle or your house. And pruning is a specialized skill. It takes some training. So if you're interested in learning more about pruning young trees, I encourage you to come to Trees Atlanta's pruning classes. We teach them in person throughout the growing season because we're so focused on planting during the fall and winter. So April through September is when we're teaching our pruning classes, and you can find them all on our web calendar. Our next one is actually this weekend in the fourth ward. So like I said before, you'll need to hire an arborist when the tree gets beyond what you can do safely yourself. We recommend hiring ISA certified arborists, which I will go over a little bit more in a few minutes. Please don't attempt to climb a tree yourself. Could get seriously hurt. There are pruning standards that we use for pruning. They are the American National Standards Institute approved standards. You can find these if you're interested in reading them through the Tree Care Industry Association or the International Society of Arboriculture. All ISA certified arborists follow these standards for pruning, and they are the best standards for keeping your trees healthy and keeping you safe. The best time to prune is in fall and winter, especially for deciduous trees, because you can see the branching structure more easily. So I recommend doing it if you can in your own yard in the fall and winter. But because Trees Atlanta is so busy with our planting projects in the fall and winter, we do the majority of our pruning in the spring and summer. So we just have to be careful about how much we're removing from the tree. The standards recommend that you don't remove more than 1/3 of the live crown ratio, which means the canopy of the tree that's alive, to avoid stressing the tree out. And we teach our volunteers about which species can handle more canopy removal in a pruning session and which need less. It just depends on how sensitive the tree is and how easily it's stressed out in an urban setting. So if you're interested in pruning, that's something that you'll be coached on as a Trees Atlanta volunteer. I've taught a lot of pruning classes, and these are some of the common questions that I get. I wanted to go ahead and just cover them because you may be wondering them as well. We often get asked if we put anything on the pruning wound. So when we've removed a branch, what's left behind on the tree is what we call the pruning wound. And I think some people maybe paint something on that wound or perhaps add something to it. But this is generally not recommended, and we don't do it. It's not like a general practice that anyone would do. It's only used by arborists in very special situations where they are aware of like a certain pest in the area at a certain time of year, and they think that they need to protect that wound from being infested. But generally, we don't recommend it because it can create more problems for the tree. We also get asked, what do we do if we see utility pruning that's not following the ANSI A300 standards? So like this picture I have on this slide is a tree that was topped. It could have been done by utility pruning, or it could have been the owner of the property there, but either way, it's incorrect. And if you see something like this happening, what do you do? Typically, or the most common utility pruning that we see here in Atlanta is for overhead power lines. And so what I've done in the past is contact my utility and let them know what's going on. Here in Atlanta, we're mostly serviced by Georgia Power for overhead power lines. So you can get in touch with their forestry department. They have a department that oversees distribution lines, which are the lines that go to your houses along streets. And then there's a different department for transmission, and they oversee the high voltage lines that are moving power quickly throughout communities, but not necessarily bringing them to the residential streets. So if you're looking for those, you can reach out to Trees Atlanta if you have trouble finding your forester for your area, and we can get you in touch with them so that they can make sure that their crews or their contractors are pruning up to standard. And then the last question that we often get is about topping, and do we ever recommend it? And topping means that you are cutting the branches of a tree back typically to like one height. You're making cuts not back to nodes or branches and leaving stubs. And this is never good for the tree, so we don't ever recommend it. And no matter what someone tries to tell you, definitely don't do it on your tree. Even crepe myrtles. So crepe myrtle pruning is, we recommend pruning just like we prune all other trees. We're always pruning back to nodes, which is something that you would learn more about in our pruning classes if you're interested. And we don't just chop the tree off at one height like the picture on top. The picture below, the yes picture, is what we're going for. Crepe myrtles are gorgeous trees. There's a reason why they're so popular. They're beautiful, they flower beautifully, they're super tough. You cannot kill a crepe myrtle. And so when people top them inappropriately, they sprout back, they flush out because they're such tough trees and they're never going to die. They live. And because of this quick growth, people, I'm assuming, think that it's okay and that the tree responded well to that. But it's really ending up with a stunted tree, and we're commonly seeing powdery mildew on that new growth because powdery mildew likes to grow on fresh stems and fresh leaves, like tender leaves. So the more fresh growth you have on the tree, the more you're going to have that powdery mildew on your tree. So we see a lot on crepe myrtles that have been topped, and it's not pretty. Also, you just don't get that gorgeous vase-like shape that the crepe myrtle can offer by topping. So topping's never good. It's ugly. If you want a smaller crepe myrtle, make sure to choose a dwarf variety that will stay small. There are hundreds of varieties of crepe myrtles because they're such a popular tree in the nursery trade. The only time I really prune a crepe myrtle, just wanted to mention, is for clearance or something that's broken. They just don't really need much structural pruning. They're so tough, and most of the rules that we follow for our other trees just don't apply to crepe myrtles. So one other thing I wanted to talk about is what to do if you have vines growing up your tree. So most native vines coexist peacefully with trees, and they can grow on the tree can support them, they don't take over the tree, and everything's fine. But some of our non-native vine species tend to take over a tree and completely cover it, which creates issues such as, like, you can't see what's going on with your tree. So if your tree is developing issues and it's covered by English ivy, you won't be aware of what the issues are because you can't actually see the tree. Also, English ivy and kudzu and wisteria and very fast-growing vines can end up covering an entire tree, even its leaves, and preventing it from being able to make the food that it needs, which kills it. And English ivy is evergreen, which means that it's covering that tree year round. So it's especially detrimental for other evergreen trees. Also, it can add weight to the tree. So if there are already issues with the tree or the tree is in decline and you have heavy vines growing on them, it can create more of a hazard for the tree and potentially make it more likely to fail. So some of the vines that we're really concerned about are the top three that I mentioned: English ivy, kudzu, and Chinese wisteria. But we also see trees covered in winter creeper, which is a type of bittersweet that looks very similar to English ivy. And then occasionally we see Japanese honeysuckle become a problem, but it's less likely to be a problem for large trees. So what do? We try to remove the vines from the trees safely. But the first thing to do before removing a vine is to make sure that you've identified it correctly. Make sure that you don't have more than one species on the tree. And if you do, be able to learn or look up, like, what are all of the species, because you could be aiming to remove English ivy and then accidentally also remove a native beneficial vine, or you could accidentally be cutting into poison ivy, which could create a health hazard for you. It could irritate your skin. So poison ivy is a native vine that typically doesn't create any issues for trees. It can grow on a tree and not harm it. But if you were to cut into it while you were removing other vines, it could really make you itchy. So make sure you can ID what you're removing. And if you have one of these aggressively growing vines, you can use hand pruners or a folding saw, like a small hand saw, to cut the vines at about chest height and then cut it again at the base and just pull that section off. We don't recommend pulling the vines out of the tree the rest of the way because you could potentially pull a branch down or something heavy on you and hurt yourself. So just leave the vine in the tree to die. And if you really want a ground cover like English ivy, or you're looking for that type of ground cover, here are some recommendations for things you can replace it with. We typically have all three of these plants at our native plant sale in the spring, which we just had in early April. But we'll have it again next year. And we also have a tree sale in the fall where we sometimes have smaller perennials like this, but I can't guarantee it. We'll definitely have them at our spring plant sale. And these things won't grow up the tree and they won't create issues. They're also beneficial for our native wildlife. And don't forget, mulch is an option. I'm glad I wrote that note on this slide because mulch is the best thing you can put around your tree as a ground cover. All right, so I want to go back to when to hire an arborist. When you have any tree health issues that you think need to be diagnosed, you could call a certified arborist. If you start to see your tree in decline, like it's dying back from the tips, that's a good time to call an arborist to diagnose what could be going on with your tree. If you have construction projects, like I mentioned earlier, it's great to have an arborist come out and look at what the potential impacts can be. If you have storm damage or you need to do pruning on large trees, or any time that tree work needs to be done near a utility line, definitely hire an ISA certified arborist. And really anything else that has to do with your trees that you're wondering about, arborists can help. So there's two types of arborists. There are consulting arborists, and then there's tree service companies. The consulting arborists are typically independent of tree service companies. They're going to come out and evaluate your tree and write a prescription, but they don't complete the work for that prescription. Then you would be looking for a tree service company to complete the work. There are a few companies that do both, and that's fine too, but often it's nice to have a or like an unbiased opinion. So you can hire a consulting arborist to give you that unbiased opinion because they're not going to be completing the work. Tree service companies, on the other hand, do complete the work. They have arborists on staff. They'll come out and they assess the needs, they give quotes for work, and then they perform the tree work. The best way to find an arborist here in Atlanta is to visit the Georgia Arborist Association's website, georgiaarborist.org. They have a list of all of their members. And what I like about it is that it describes the kind of tree work that they do. So if you're looking for something in particular, you can find an arborist that specializes in that. You also want to look for arborists who have certifications from the International Society of Arboriculture and or the Tree Care Industry Association, because it helps distinguish experience. And I think it shows an investment in the industry and an investment in continuing their education. I say certified arborists also must adhere to a code of ethics. So they have to agree to it when they become certified. They have to follow it, and the ISA, the International Society of Arboriculture, can help provide support and follow up if there's ever a complaint against one of their members. A great way to find an arborist is to ask for recommendations from friends and neighbors and then check up on all these things that I've mentioned, because you can learn who does work in your area that way. And then, of course, get multiple bids. The lowest is not always the best. You want somebody who's actually going to do good work on your trees and not leave you with more of a problem. And then, of course, always look for tree workers who are insured, and you can ask for their certificate of insurance. If they can't provide it, that's not a good sign. One more thing that I wanted to mention to you guys is that some municipalities have tree protection ordinances. So they've set aside, or they have created rules against what you can do to trees in their community. It's to protect our urban forest, and make sure that we citizens don't just decimate it. Ordinance can stipulate things like requiring permits for tree removal or tree work. They stipulate what types of trees you can plant. Sometimes there's pruning standards in ordinances and construction protection standards. So they're working with developers and construction companies to make sure that they're protecting the trees while they're doing the construction work. So you can look into your own municipality and find out. Sometimes the ordinances are through cities or through counties. All right, so one of the last things I wanted to mention is, how do you know if a tree is dead? We get this question a lot. So I'll talk about how to tell on young trees and how to tell on old trees. For young, small trees, we just use the scratch test. So you can see the picture here on the top. This person has used their fingernail to scratch away a tiny bit of bark, and it's green underneath, which means that it's still alive. If you scratch the bark and it's brown, like the photo on the bottom, that means that wood is dead. So you can check a few parts of your tree and evaluate like how much of your tree is dead, or is the whole tree dead? This is what we use out in the field as well to check on our tree. Typically trees that have dead wood have like that dead wood is brittle and breaks easily. If it's a large tree that you can't reach, you can't touch its branches, you're looking for things like browning leaves or absent leaves in the growing season if it doesn't have leaves. If the branches look curled up, like they're just withering, if they're brittle and they snap off, or you see a lot of branches laying on the ground. If there's no buds on a tree, that means it's dead as well. So if there's a branch in particular you're wondering about during the rest season, like winter time, look for buds. And if you don't see any buds that are going to open up in the spring, that might mean that that branch is dead. And then as trees are real dead, they start shedding their branches. They've been dead for a while. If you're interested in learning about tree identification, I recommend field guides that you can, like small field guides you can carry along with you while you're out and about looking at trees. But also the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants by Dr. Michael Durr is a great resource. It's just like a hefty book, like an encyclopedia. And it's something you'd probably want to leave at home, but it has really great information about all of the trees that we have here in the Southeast, both ornamental and like native forest trees. And then if you like to use apps, we recommend iNaturalist. Some of my volunteers use LeafSnap as well, but you have to have leaves for that. And then you are welcome to come on a Trees Atlanta tour. We have tree tours throughout the year. We have several on the Beltline Arboretum and several in neighborhoods around the city. And among other things, the docents will talk about some tree ID. Also, volunteering with Trees Atlanta is a great way to learn tree ID because you're around trees all the time. And then we do occasionally offer tree ID classes. Tree ID is part of our Tree Keeper series, which is a training program for our volunteers. So if you think you might be interested, please email me, which I'll give you my contact information at the end, and let me know, and I can help set you up with Tree Keepers. Also wanted to mention that we have a front yard tree planting program, and you can apply for free front yard trees if you live in certain municipalities around Atlanta. These are the cities we're currently partnering with. So Atlanta, Brookhaven, Chamblee, Decatur, DeKalb County, and Sandy Springs and Doraville. So please visit our website if you might be interested in having a front yard tree planted. There's a limited number every year, and we take applications throughout the summer and then fulfill them in the fall and winter. All right, do we have any questions? Oh, good. Thank you for putting the link to the next pruning class in there.
So I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, but feel free if you guys have any questions to drop some. I actually have a question, Susan, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
While you're here, but yeah, while people are dropping questions, I just wanted to go back on like the mulch thing with the ground cover. Does the ground cover also help with erosion like the mulch does, or is it there
Yeah.
for a different reason?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Yes, it can for
Mhm,
sure, because having roots in the ground will help hold that soil in place.
mhm.
But I think usually people are keeping English ivy around because of its ornamental value, because they like something green on the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's evergreen, which we don't have a lot of evergreen species in the Piedmont forest. So it is hard to replace it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think and sometimes we see it for soil erosion too.
And also, how would you control roots from spreading, I guess, in trees? Would that also be like the ground cover thing or
Like if you want to stop roots from going into a certain area.
yeah.
Um, so I have never actually used this myself, but I have heard that there are root barriers, which is like putting a material vertically into the ground to stop
Mhm.
roots from growing a certain way. But since I haven't used them myself, I'm not sure how effective they are. For most trees, 90% of a tree's roots are in the top 2 feet of the soil.
Mhm.
So I would think that, going down about 2 feet might be sufficient, but there could be some trees that would just find their way around it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so root barriers is one option that I've heard of.
Thank you for the suggestion. Okay, so I don't see any questions coming in right now. So I think we can start wrapping up. Um, oh
Okay.
yeah, here you wrap up, and then I just have like another plug-in at the end.
Okay. So if you think of any questions, or if you'd like to get involved with our Tree Keepers program or learn more about pruning, you can reach me at susan@treesatlanta.org. And I think I forgot to put that on a slide. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah, my last slide. But also, like I said, you're invited to come to any of our walking tour or tree tours. They're free and open to the public. Our pruning classes are also free and open to the public. And it's a series: pruning 101, 102, 103. It's sequential. So you'll take 101 and 102 and then 103. And then you're welcome to come volunteer with us anytime. We would love to have your help. I know Veritiv will be volunteering as a group coming up in the next year. But if you're ever interested in volunteering as an individual, we would love to have your help.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan, for taking the time today. Um, I also have like some really last minute plugins. So Susan mentioned the app iNaturalist, and in 2 days, actually, something called the City Nature Challenge is starting. It's like a worldwide thing where cities compete against each other to see how many like native plants and animals, like species, they can log onto this app. And it's also just a great way to go outside with your family, take walks while doing it. And it's a great way for all of us to just figure out or like to tag more species in our area. So feel free to do that. There's not much you need to do. You just have to download the app and get outside. Um, and yeah, please feel free to sign up for our newsletter to get more events like this, including volunteer events, which Susan is in charge of, and more education events. There's a lot of in-person stuff too for adults, for kids, and for families. So feel free to check that out. And again, please fill out that survey that we're going to send out just to help us do better and to help present our information in a better way. So thank you guys so much for coming out today. And please have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I hope it was helpful. We appreciate your time with us. Take care.
Bye bye. Thank you.